Welcome back to Imperfect, the Heart-Centered Leadership Podcast. And I know I have said this, I don't even know how many times now, Greg, in the last 5 years and over 300 leaders. I meet the coolest people on this show, and then they send me cool people. So we got to give a shout out to our mutual colleague and friend, Dr. Tom Tompkin, because he connected us together. And I can see why, and we'll share with our listeners why over the next 30 minutes. But Greg, share with us who you are and what you do, and why did you want to come on the show?
So great to be on here. Deborah, thank you so much for the opportunity, of course. And yes, Tom is one great guy. So I thank him as well. I have I like sharing the story because I have kind of a unique background. So it kind of starts with when I was a kid, and you'll see how it plays in later, that I actually went to church as a kid and became a Christian as a kid, but my parents quit going, which meant I quit going. And then I did the party hardy teen years, as a lot of us did. And then I suffered the consequences from those years and then recommitted my life to Christ and then ended back up at the same church that I went to. Well, at that time, I felt called into the ministry and actually spent a summer in South America on a missions trip. And then when I came back, I had like, back in the day when you have like a bunch of adults had 160 credit hours, but no degree. And they started the adult programs like one night a week. So I was one of the first of those. So I got my bachelor's degree in organizational leadership. And I liked it, enjoyed it, but I was, full steam ahead towards seminary. So my first semester of seminary, I took philosophy of counseling and my eyes were opened and it was a defining moment. So I immediately mapped out a dual degree, MDiv seminary for pastoring, and then an MA in counseling. So I got my Master of Divinity in 3 years in 2000. And right during that point, another perfect storm happened where I came across the book Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. He wrote the book in 1995 and popularized the concept. And then I started teaching for my alma mater in all the organizational leadership courses and then fell in love with leadership, organizational leadership. At the very same time, perfect storm, I was underneath a leader who had a lot of struggles. So I just fell in love with leadership as well. So I got my master's in counseling and started clinical practice. I was a pastor, adjunct professor, counselor. And then I started my PhD in counseling, but I did my dissertation on the relationship of emotional intelligence with job satisfaction and organizational commitment. So another organizational development piece of this. So after I got my PhD in 2008, I then started doing consulting, organizational development consulting, as well as executive coaching at a very high-powered medical device company back in my hometown of Michigan. And so I had all these hats on and I loved every single one. So after 15 years at the same church, had a great experience. I kind of dove off and started doing other things along those realms and eventually moved to Texas in 2012. And everything from, I flew around the country for 3 years meeting with senior leadership teams on strategy and then coaching the executives across all industries, to then becoming a director of a residential treatment center for troubled teens at a behavioral health hospital. And now I'm doing full-time telehealth, where I see about 40 clients a week and I still do executive coaching. So it's always been this kind of hodgepodge. And I've been wanting to write this book for about 20 years now. So it just one thing led to another, and finally had this opportunity to write my long-standing book, but it came out of my own personal growth and development process, honestly, that after going through a divorce and having to do some deep diving into my own heart of like, what's going on here. And so once I did that deep dive for about close to 10 years, the product of not just my kind of knowledge, expertise of, everything, but also the richness of doing some serious work in my own heart that kind of produced and kind of came together for the book. So that's kind of, little Cliff Notes version of what led to where I am at today.
Well, I've got some good questions prepared for you. So are you ready? Okay, the first one, I wanted to tap into your emotional intelligence and leadership. So in your experience as both a counselor and an executive coach, how do you see the role of emotional intelligence in fostering authentic, heart-centered leadership within organizations? Because that's near and dear to my heart. I even put my heart necklace on for you today.
That's perfect. Yeah. To just keep pointing at the heart. So I keep going back to
That's
that,
it.
right? So EI just in you look at the construct of, Daniel Goleman's construct is very simple. There's different formats of EI,
Yeah.
but his is like self and others, right? So self-awareness, self-management, others awareness, and others management. So others management kind of formed itself to become social intelligence. And I say that relationship management, social intelligence is like communication skills, relationship skills. But when people look at those concepts, they're like, okay, these are great. But where I take it, those, I immediately link it to personality and temperament.
Mm-hmm.
Because whenever a leader does a 360 and kind of assesses strengths and weaknesses, and again, whatever it comes down to, whether it be the Gallup strengths, the DISC, the MBTI, it does not matter. It's always going to link with how does a leader understand his or her own personality, because a strength taken too far becomes a weakness, right? And you can play that in. And so you need emotional intelligence, because where your strengths, strong or weak as a leader, where I'm strong, is directly related to our temperament. But then I say personality ran through the machine of EI equals your individual, interpersonal and personal effectiveness. Because it's got to be linked to, you need this foundational construct of what our natural programming is, then apply EI to it. Because that's actually exactly how we need to apply EI, like self-awareness and self-management. Because when I get upset, I have negative emotions, I take my strength too far because I want to control the situation or get like some security around it. And that's when I become too ... So every leader becomes too direct. They become too spontaneous and impulsive. They become too passive and run away from conflict, or they become too detailed and paralysis analysis and critical. So EI kind of falls over the concept of personality. So that's always a major construct of utilizing EI to help every leader grow, because the results of the 360 are going to be linked back to their temperament and personality every single time.
I love the way you frame that. And I always have to throw in a bit of humor here. The 360 is a great tool, but I often compare it to that of a 911 operator. You never know the outcome. And I find, as an external trusted partner, much like you, we get brought in to integrate those outcomes. And
Yep.
that takes a person who knows EQ really well. And I
Mhm.
also love the way you aligned and focused it on the behavior of an over focus or an under focus. Really, really love that. I knew you were going to give me a good answer to that question. Okay, my second question
Yep.
has permanent residency on the show. What imperfections, it can be plural or it can be singular, does Greg bring to his heart-centered leadership?
Okay, so my imperfections, as far as like that I bring to leadership coaching or just to leadership in general. So I have my own personality, and my imperfections have to do with, like, based upon the disc. I'm a DI, so complete extrovert, and my two is I'm one of those that can become too direct or too free with my speech, in a sense. So when I was a director at the behavioral health center as an RTC, I gave the teenage girls, an opportunity. I said, okay, girls, just to try and teach them, they don't have to get triggered at everything. And I said, girls, you can say whatever you want to try and upset me, to trigger me. And one of the things that the girls commonly said about me was, Dr. Greg, you're so extra. Now, when I first heard that, I was like, girls, I have no idea what that means, but it sounds like a compliment. So thank you. Right. But what they mean is I bring way too much intensity to each
Mm,
situation. Right. So which can honestly, what makes some people shrink back.
yeah.
And what do we want? We want transparency. We want openness. And when Greg comes in, and that obviously makes them shrink back. So that is absolutely something that I need to own. And it's also driven out of just my own, as a human being. I have insecurities,
Yeah.
right? Right. And insecurities have been a major thing that I've worked through. So I would say now that I don't have them, I can literally say I don't have insecurities anymore, because insecurity is about exposure of weaknesses. So
I hope.
there's a whole process there. But I would say that out of those insecurities over the years, that inflated a lot of these negative emotions for sure.
Absolutely. And, life and leadership's intertwined, and we can't control those tsunamis or those roadblocks or those interconnected moments. Okay, third question. Beautiful segue, by the way. You don't even know what I'm going to ask you. I want to talk about overcoming negative emotions. So, given your expertise, Greg, in addressing negative emotions through your book, I3, Unlock the Inner Strength Behind Your Negative Emotions, how can leaders effectively navigate their own emotional challenges to create a compassionate and supportive workplace culture? Because I'm sure this is something you run into on the daily, like me. So I'm looking forward
Yeah.
to your insights.
Yes, of course. And it's actually I was a math major in college, so I actually called it I cubed.
I
And I get
cubed.
everybody says I3, and I probably should have picked a better title because it's hard, but I'm kind of a stickler. I've been wondering I cubed, it's just my
It's a
mathematician.
conversation piece now,
Yeah, it's
Greg.
there you go.
Well
Yeah,
done.
exactly. Right, exactly. Okay, so I would say when it comes to the negative emotions and leaders, I'm going to go like very, very broad scope culturally and even organizationally. So you saw it both in organizations and personal, that in the let's say 60s, 70s, 80s, what have you, that there was a pendulum swing. And a technique I use in the book is that between grace and truth. So grace and empathy, understanding love,
Mhm.
without truth and boundaries and hard conversations turns into enablement. And then truth, boundaries, and hard conversations without grace and empathy and understanding is toxic. So
Mm.
you saw culture from organizations to families to individuals from the 60s, 70s, and so on, when there was a lot of hurt, again, in all areas, organizationally, familial, and interpersonally, of that hurt from toxicity. So now the pendulum culture has swung so far to the other end,
Mm.
where it's all about the only goal seems to be achieved is grace, empathy, love, and understanding, to where obviously that has turned into enablement. Now, again, based upon regardless of where you stand on the election, people are starting to understand that the pendulum has reached its peak.
Mhm.
And now it's starting to come back and saying, hey, we need some more truth and boundaries here and logic. And you see, even organizations, they went to whether or not their whatever degree of participation in DEI. Well, what's DEI? It is grace, empathy, understanding, and love, to
Mm.
where organizations now, because of the ramifications from that on the bottom line, frankly, they're starting to swing back. So leaders, when it comes to negative emotions, number one is negative emotions are not bad. And there's been, I believe, a vilifying of negative emotions at all levels, just
Mhm.
make people feel good about the positivity, right?
Yeah.
To where, so negative emotions are not bad. It kind of, they're windows that kind of expose them, like insecurity. Insecurity is something that is true about me, but I don't want it exposed. Well, if it's true, I need to be okay. So the fact that I have negative emotions around you saying, Dr. Greg, you're so extra. I've even seen it on this podcast. I'm like, I can't believe you said about that about me, right? So it's being okay with that
Yeah.
exposure
Yeah.
because it helps me grow. But
Absolutely.
then when it comes to the deeper level, on the surface is all the negative emotions I just mentioned. But I say that the way to kind of recognize it is I always picture it as a house. So allow me this illustration. So I'm on the front lawn and all these people are standing before me and they're the ones that just upset me, right? You say something negative or don't do something, you hurt my
Mhm.
feelings or whatever it is. I, as a human, do what's natural. I start burning all my emotional energy on what you did or didn't do
Mhm.
to hurt me. And I'd say, okay, there may be something very legitimate you need to address with those people. However, stop, because of what? You need to be aware, self aware of EI, self aware on if your emotion is inflated. So you telling me I'm extra on a scale of 1 to 10 is what? A 2, right?
Yeah.
But if I'm at a 6, 7, or 8, that inflation is not your issue, it's mine. Because if I just give you
Mm.
that 8 level of energy, I'm going to cause damage. Instead of just addressing the issue like I should, I'm going to cause damage. So I'm saying if you have an inflation of emotions, you have to stop and you have to turn around, because behind me is the house of my heart.
Yeah.
And that's where I say unlock the door and walk into that front door of your heart and the negative emotion, because that first room is insecurity. And off to the side is the door that goes into the basement. And the basement contains first the machine of identity, value, and worth. Like, who am I as a person? And then my value and worth with that identity of just facts about myself. So you ever get like when somebody takes things personally?
Yeah.
What that means is that the insult is not just like insecurity. I take it personally, which means that insult is impacting my value and worth. So we have to go into the basement and do some serious work around that identity, value, and worth. And I have a whole system for that. But over in the cellar, that dark, musty corner is trauma. And trauma, there's big T and little t. Big T trauma is like true, like threat of loss of life with them. But almost all of us have gone through little T trauma. Very difficult experiences from our past. And all that means is that when I enter into a present tense situation, my mental model goes, scoops the emotion from that event and says to me and plops it on this scenario, and it gets inflated. And it says, oh, Greg, oh no, here we go again. So again, it could be from my hurt from the past that has, again, nothing to do with the situation or you, that my mental model is just simply saying, Greg, you're in danger again. And that could be just little T trauma, let's say, from a job loss or a divorce or a very financial, difficult time in your life that, when you get that, you get triggered again, triggered in a good way, that inflates it. So whether it be taking it personally gets inflated or dealing with like memories from the past. So that's where I say that walking into our negative emotions, let's say on the surface, insecurity, anxiety, fear, worry, anger, depression, but walking in the door first tells you if it gets inflated that you may need to go in the basement and kind of do some work around that. And every leader, because every leader is personal, every leader in their identity of significance and being successful as a leader and how other people see them.
Yeah.
That emotion gets inflated. So that's when I bring myself and my value and worth into my direct reports, following my lead and validating me.
Yeah.
Or my peers or my boss. It becomes personal.
It does.
Right? Yeah. That's the negative emotions that we have to kind of address just as humans in general, but especially in organizations.
Oh, absolutely. I love how you reframe that. Okay, my last question is around leadership and organizational commitment. You have researched on emotional intelligence and its relationship to job satisfaction. You alluded to that. And organizational commitment is powerful. How can leaders cultivate emotional intelligence in their teams to enhance long-term engagement and loyalty, especially in today's fast-paced work environments, especially at the executive level where we're seeing tremendous flight risk?
Yes, exactly. So great question. So one is the differentiation between formal power and informal power. Formal power being positional power, knowledge and expertise, and coercive reward, which a lot of us kind of rely on. But that's more like management versus informal power is the relational. That's where true leadership as opposed to management takes place. Again, both are needed. We have to have leaders that need to, kind of execute, like, because we are machines hired by our company to perform. That's on the management side, though. But when it comes to leadership, there's two things I would say that to the application of EI comes to play out. So going back to the senior leadership teams I would work with, I would ask them like question among others, who are the worst leaders you've ever been under? Right? That's always easiest to remember. And then invariably there's a number of different answers, but the two most common by far that directly link back to a leader's emotional intelligence is two things. One is my leader teachable? Meaning they not only are open to my ideas, insight, or feedback, but they ask for it, right? They look for it. And secondly, do they listen? Right? Truly listen. And it's obviously the worst leaders they're not teachable, right? They don't listen to my ideas because they think they contain all knowledge, right? They have monopoly on it. And secondly, they're just not good listeners because it is about relationship. And we all know this, that we don't leave companies. People don't leave companies, they leave supervisors, right?
Mhm.
So on the exact opposite, who are the best leaders,
Mhm.
it has to do with those two as well. So every individual development plan I've ever done with any leader,
Mhm.
I mandate contains two techniques. One is what I call proactive teachability. So
Yes.
the opposite is reactive teachability is you're upset with me, you come to me, address it, confront me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm teachable, but it's reactive. So I
Mhm.
say our goal is, and this literally changes the atmosphere in an organization. If I had them go to a person, have coffee, sit down in the office, and ask people, say, Deb, I want to know how you think I can grow. Okay. Now, your first blush response is, well, Greg, this or this kind of surface the answer. I said, no, Deb, wait. I want the final 10% in the back of your mind about me that you would never, ever share. I want you to do your best to slaughter me because that's where the meat is. And there
Y-
might be either stuff that I'm blind to, or it might be like some assumptions you have about me that I would love the chance to correct. But it's proactive.
Yes.
And every single one of us knows, I don't care what role, parents, whether we're at our jobs or whether it be, doesn't matter what role we're in, we should proactively go to people and ask for insight and feedback because we all have blind areas, right?
Mm.
So proactive teachability. Secondly is the active listening skills, where it's, have you ever asked your children if how you can grow as a parent? Have you ever asked your spouse how you can be better as a spouse? So when it comes to active listening, have you ever asked your listeners, people who are talking to you, hey, do you feel heard by me? So you never hear like, somebody say that, I was talking to the CEO at the company and it was like I was the only person in the room.
Yeah.
So it's not just like
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
heard me, it is I see you. And I
Yeah.
always kind of point
So
back to the Avatar movie,
validation. Yeah.
right?
Validation.
Validation. That
Yeah.
because we are emotional creatures
Yeah.
and my job is important to me. So those two skills are truly like a play out of true EI in leaders' abilities. And there's others, but those are the two biggies.
I know we could talk about this all day, couldn't we? We
Mm.
could deep dive and offshoot and okay, I'm gonna move over to my Fab Four, just four fun questions. We want to know what's sitting on top of that brilliant mind of yours. What is one tip you can give our listeners today on how to embrace heart-centered leadership in their daily life?
I would say, obviously related to my book, I would do an inventory of areas that you feel the most exposed.
Mm.
Like in the last 6 months, where have you felt, did you feel defensive, right? Or when did you get, the whole trigger because there's something there, and that's again the doorway to something that might be deeper. But on the other side, I
Mhm.
can't emphasize is intense growth, rest, and peace
I
and
love
confidence.
I love
Yeah.
that. Okay, second question. If your leadership style had a theme song, what would it be?
Oh goodness. Living on a prayer.
And you know what's fun about this question is I get every genre of music this season, and you get to see where people lean in. That's a great song. I'm a Bon Jovi fan.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, it fits because living on a prayer, I would say this, that has to do with teachability and humility. I may have a PhD, but I guess I say that people always say the more education you get, the more you realize you don't know. And I recognize that having an aura of, okay, I don't know what to do here automatically makes me want to get insight and wisdom from you. So it just creates an aura that I don't have any of this mastered and I need help.
I
Living on a
love
prayer.
it.
Just
I
came up
love it.
that fit
I love
perfect.
it. Okay, number three, summarize one key takeaway or lesson from our discussion today to leave with our listeners to ponder.
Okay, so I would say just practically uh, get EI books and learn EI,
Mm.
right? And secondly, um, learn your personality. There's a bunch of different programs out there. Learn your personality and then merge them together because you will see a direct correlation in every area of life and every relationship between the two.
I love that. Okay. I'm so glad that Tom connected us. I can see why he connected us. And I'm going to have you finish the show by answering or finishing this sentence for me.
Sure.
Heart centered leadership is.
Heart centered leadership is having a mission and a passion to make everybody you come in contact with better through the process of relationship and a heart of, hey, me too.